You're listening to Puck and Roll.
Hello, and welcome back to the Puck and Roll podcast. This is a big episode because we have multiple talking points, including a couple of small things like the draft happened, where the Habs picked first overall, where they traded away Alexander Romanov, where they had, I believe, they ended up picking 11 times. That was rather eventful. And we've also had a couple other major things happen since then, such as the Mike Matheson for Jeff Petry trade, where we also left the Montreal Canadiens. And on top of that, some not big, but some worthwhile to mention extensions signed to Rem Pitlick and Samuel Montembeault. So for this episode, we have a fairly full house. I'm joined by Aaron Itovich, Joshua Rosa, and Scott Cowan. How are you guys doing?
Just fine, Sebastian.
Finally got my name right.
Oh, shut up. Yes, I'm sorry. I mispronounced his name, which was great. And yeah, so considering that the Mike Matheson for Jeff Petry trade just happened, we should probably start with that. So Jeff Petry, who has what I believe 3 years left at $6.25 million, was traded along with Ryan Poehling to the Pittsburgh Penguins for Michael Matheson, a Montreal native, making Aaron, you're the contract was here. Is it 4.85?
4.875.
I believe Matheson.
Yeah, $4 million.
4.75.
Okay, 8.75. Yeah, as well as a fourth round pick. As someone who covers the draft, do not discount the value of the fourth round pick. There will be valuable players available there.
Make it the next Joshua Wall
key return in this trade. Yeah, exactly, right. But Matheson is the return here, and it's a really interesting gamble for the Montreal Canadiens because Michael Matheson, on his contract, performing the way he did in the last 3 seasons before this past season, is a Carl Alsner type contract. It is bad in terms of just how he performed. However, Michael Matheson on his contract as he performed last season, now that's a valuable top 4 defenseman there, and he's going to get a shot on the first pairing for Montreal because I don't see how you play Joel Edmondson with David in the first pairing. It's going to be Matheson Savard on the first pairing, which is good for the tank, I think, already. But Matheson will have every opportunity to flash his offensive skills. So I'll just address the question to you all. What are your thoughts on the trade, and what do you think that Matheson can bring to the table?
You said that there's a lot of value in the fourth round pick, and I absolutely agree. Could have even gotten the guy 29th on my board in Kirill Dolzhenkov. But we also can't discount the fact that we gave up the 25th overall pick from 4 years ago. And obviously, Poehling didn't turn out perfectly. We could have had Jake Ottinger right after. But I feel like...
Please do not bring that up. Oh, God.
I feel like we had to sweeten the Petry deal. And even if Matheson turns out, I feel like a Petry for Matheson 1-for-1 trade would have been a lot more reasonable. As for what Matheson brings... I was very, very down on it at first because I didn't watch a single Pittsburgh game this season except for in the finals. I did, however, watch a few Panthers games the year before, and he was just absolutely brutal. But the narrative has changed a little bit around him, so feeling a little hopeful.
I think the thing that, to consider with Poehling, especially for me personally, is that everyone who I guess is big into prospects, is still seeing his value. But I unfortunately feel like Paling fell into the same trap that Charles Hudel fell into when he was in Montreal, which basically is that his value just kind of went from being a top prospect to a guy who was just kind of underdeveloped and people didn't really know what to do with him. And then the Habs ended up just letting Hudon go to free agency. But the thing about Paling that's bizarre is that he's not offensive enough yet to be a top six forward, and he isn't that great enough defensively to be a truly productive bottom six forward. So maybe going to Pittsburgh will be a chance for the team to reinvent him and see maybe if he can be that original 25th overall expectations. And I think the thing to consider with Matheson especially is that coming into Montreal, people are going to think that he isn't a huge player in terms of his potential just because of the numbers he's posted before and how brutal he was in Florida, especially in the 2018-19 season where he was minus 24. But I think looking at the season he had in Pittsburgh and the attributes he brings to the table, I could see him being a similar story to the way Max Domi was in Montreal. Obviously not quite as productive, as for quite frankly that 72-point season still haunts Max Domi as he hasn't been able to live up to it. But I feel like if he's given a top pairing role and a chance to play big minute crunchy minutes, he could be a big surprise and surpass even the expectations that are already had of him at this moment.
I can add for Paling, we just gave up the greatest pure goal scorer of all time, since in the, I want to say 2018-19 season, he scored at a 3-goal-a-game pace. So I feel like it's a lot to give up.
Legendary goal scorer, Ryan Halen. Josh, I haven't heard much from you just yet. What were your thoughts initially on the trade, and has your opinion changed as the discourse in Habs land has also kind of shifted over the last couple of days surrounding the trade?
Yeah, I'm definitely not as high on the trade as it seems like you guys are, just because I'm trying to base it on the value that Petry can bring to a team, especially when you're looking at a team that can really support him well in Pittsburgh with their defensive core. I just felt that, like, again, we're selling low on a guy like Petry because he can play borderline top line production at his best, but obviously this past year wasn't, and it's hard. You don't know what's going on in the locker room because he requested the trade and then St. Louis came in and it kind of got a little bit messy. I still think for all the talk that we were talking about getting the right deal and holding out, I just don't love the return. I mean, Matheson is a good fit for our top four. He's the kind of guy that we haven't had outside of me for a while, which is that puck moving offensive defenseman that could get the transition game started really well. But give up Tree, and for him, I don't love it. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, but yeah, the tank seems pretty good with that top pairing of Matheson and David Savard. Oh dear Lord.
Yeah, and we all know that Josh is the biggest David Savard fan on earth.
Love him
he
to
just
death.
can't get enough of him. Yeah,
I mean, I still think that putting Edmondson with Matheson wouldn't be the worst idea in the world. I don't know about Savard, but Edmondson and Matheson would make a bit more sense to me.
I mean, yeah, I think it's very likely that Edmondson ends up playing on the right side if the Habs don't end up acquiring another right shot defenseman. Then you have like two shutdown guys on the right, and then you could have Madison on the left, and then like a guy like Jordan Harris or Caden Gooley on the second pairing. And I think that's an interesting tank kind of season defensive core to work with.
Considering that Savard is kind of going back to what you said about Alzner, Savard's kind of trending in an Alzner direction, unfortunately, even though it's only been one season. So I don't think
he's going to be as bad.
But I still think Ken Hughes and crew want to avoid that from happening because I feel like Savard isn't too far gone just yet, and there's a chance to redeem him.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you put him with a guy like Matheson, I really do think that pairing would actually play to both guys' strengths, and I'd be very curious to see how it would work as a pairing. If it's Edmondson and Savard, I'm going to die inside. But yeah, that would not be a good pairing, though. It would be very good for the tank, so maybe I would embrace it, but it would just be painful to watch. But I've been watching a bit of Mike Matheson in the last couple days, and like from his playoff performances, and he's really fun. Mike Matheson, he's a tremendous skater. With the puck on his stick, he flashes skill that no other player that like no other guy that's going to be a Habs defenseman this season can flash. Um, his scanning habits are very impressive, actually, and he plays some of the most aggressive hockey in the offensive zone from a defenseman that I've seen in a while. Whenever he like Pittsburgh turned the puck over in the offensive zone, Matheson was charging at the puck to like force the turnover back and to prolong possession in the offensive zone, which also did cause some odd man rushes, but in other cases, it created offensive opportunities, which is why I think he's going to be loved by some fans in Montreal and not quite loved by others. But I really think this is an interesting swing for the Habs to take because, look, there's a real chance that Mike Matheson flops and is a painful contract on the Habs books. But there's also a real chance that he outperforms his contract and is a very, very valuable piece in this rebuild, who can teach the young crop of Habs defensemen that is coming up how to play an offensive and skilled game, because he has that ability. And it's a very intriguing move. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him in a Habs jersey. That's for sure.
Also considering that last season, like one of the guys who was sort of a mentor on defense was Chris Weidman. And as much as I really liked the way Weidman played last year, he's not exactly a guy who you want to play that kind of role. He's a 32-year-old defenseman who's supposed to be a power play third pairing guy, not the kind of guy who steps up in the locker room, you know?
Yeah, and also I think that Matheson has not played too much on the power play in the last couple seasons, but he's going to get that opportunity this year, and I think that he's going to excel in it. Again, what I mentioned earlier, it's his scanning habits that like are some of the most impressive parts of his game that I've noticed thus far. He's constantly scanning, whether it's on retrievals, whether it's when he has the puck on his stick, if he's defending the rush, he's constantly scanning just to always know where his teammates are, where the opponents are. And on the power play, for instance, that makes him a bit of an anti-Jeff Petry. Like he's going to constantly scan to see where his teammates are, where are the passing options, how can he move in order to open up passing lanes. Like he has those abilities. So I think a guy like Cole Caulfield is going to get a lot more one-timer opportunities if he's playing on a power play with Mike Matheson than he did last season with Petry.
If there's one thing that helped Cole Caulfield the most was when he finally started getting passes. And that's why Chris Weidman was also so successful this year, is
Also when coming to Charlotte
players. Yeah. I mean, Marty St. Louis definitely has something to do with it. But Weidman got a lot of his assists off Caulfield goals. And just adding puck-moving defensemen, it's going to have an effect on every single part of the roster.
I still do find it kind of amazing how even as we move into this point of the offseason, the Habs are still feeling the drawbacks from hiring Dominic Ducharme with Petry wanting out, partly because of how miserable he fared in Ducharme's system. There's a lot to the mistake that was.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like speaking about Caulfield, it's a decent way to switch the conversation now towards the draft, because the Habs drafted a player at first overall who may very well be a long-time line mate of Cole Caulfield's in Montreal, and Yuri Slafkovsky. And picking Slafkovsky over Shane Wright was a divisive pick. What were your guys' reactions when that happened?
Everything that's followed Shane Wright in the aftermath of the everything that followed Shane Wright in the beforehand of leading up to the draft and the aftermath has painted him as a person who's just a lot more facets to his game, the mental side of his game, than I think people were realizing. And I think that kind of came to the forefront, especially after the draft. So I think with the Habs taking Slafkovsky, at first I was thinking it's a bit of a bizarre pick, but as kind of the dust has settled, I can understand it a little bit more. And I see Slafkovsky as honestly being a more potentially promising player.
I was lucky enough to be at the draft, and I was 98% convinced walking into the Bell Center that we were going to take right.
No, you weren't. No, you're lying.
That's true.
No,
I was
I remember.
98%
I remember
convinced
that. I
that morning.
no. You were 98% convinced like a week before the draft. Then the
Did I
day
say
before the
95?
draft, you were like, "I'm shitting bricks." Like, come on.
I texted
You were
you
afraid it was going to
or the
happen.
day before the draft. I'm like, I'm so scared, but it's because the Habs kept posting very right, positive stuff. And then I'm sitting and I see on Twitter like a lot of stuff where, oh my God, the betting lines have changed. Now you're taking a bet on Wright going first overall. I'm like, okay, Uri Slafkovsky's a Hab. And I was mortified the Baltender was going to boo Slafkovsky out of there. And it was an instantaneous cheering. People were thrilled. And I even yelled out, I swear I made eye contact with him. I yelled out, like, I love you, Uri. And he looked in my direction and butterflies. So Uri Slafkovsky's a
He's a
Hab.
beautiful man. I too would get butterflies.
He is a
The other
beautiful
thing to,
man, and he will be a fan favorite.
the other thing to take
Oh,
into consideration as well is
For
that
sure.
Slafkovsky has the men's league and professional experience that Wright doesn't. Right, at the end of the day, he wasn't fantastic in the SM Liga, but he was a reliable contributor on a team with veteran players who have either NHL experience or tremendous overseas experience. So I think looking back after the pick was selected, I was like, yeah, I can understand a little more because this guy has proven that he can play with men.
Yeah, look, the Habs did not draft Yuri Slafkovsky because of his Liga play. His play in the Liga was fine. Um, wasn't as good as Brad Lambert's. Wasn't
I just
as
see it
good
as more of
Joakim
an
Kamel's.
anecdote.
Yeah, but like it was his international play that really set him apart, and
Mhm.
it's also why he was such a divisive prospect going into the draft. I mean, it was really 2 months on Habs Twitter of just it was a hellscape, right? Of just constant debates where you had one side that was painting Slavkovsky as the 6'4" version of Wayne Gretzky, and another side painting him as a lifetime ECHLer, right? Where both sides are just like absurd, and it's like no, there's a middle ground here, and like look, for the sake of transparency, I scouted this draft class the entire season. Like I spent countless hours on it, and I ranked Slavkovsky at 5. Shane Wright was my first ranked player, and I really wanted Shane Wright in the Habs jersey, but it's not a bad pick at 1. Like I think there was a better pick at 1, but I think what a lot of people have at least like going into the draft. I think the narrative's changed quite a bit since it happened because again, Habs fans are often very reactionary, and it's like and like there are positives to that of the reactionary then like 180 of just supporting Slavkovsky now that he is a Hab, and that was beautiful to see as you're describing, Aaron, that like it wasn't a Bell Center filled with booze, it was support and cheers, and the fact that that happened was actually quite almost unexpected for me and beautiful. But no, it's a bet on upside because Slavkovsky, if he turns out, he could be a Mikko Rantanen, and if the Habs draft Mikko Rantanen first overall, that's a terrific pick. That would be one of the most dominant wingers in the league, and there is that kind of upside.
We're not the Ottawa Senators. Anybody we were picking at 1 was going to be a franchise altering piece.
It wasn't going to be no Tyler
I don't know if
Boucher.
franchise altering.
An important piece.
I would
Good
disagree
player.
with that. I would say a valuable
Valuable
top of the lineup complimentary because like franchise altering thing is I don't even know if Shane Wright would have been a franchise altering piece necessarily. Like it like next year you're gonna have a trifecta of those options with Michkov, Bedard, and Fantilli.
Yeah.
All 3 of those guys would have gone first overall this year, in my opinion.
Hopsky would have gone. Like this draft
Yeah.
was nothing compared to the 23 draft.
I'm very excited for next year's draft class, but Yuri
Excited to have a
Slafkovsky is
terrible year.
yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
like Slafkovsky is a very he's a very mobile skater. He really needs to work on his like top end speed, but he's so powerful, like both in like in his stride, but also like this man was throwing grown men off his back like they were like mosquitoes, right? Like he is incredibly strong. He's immediately going to be one of the NHL's best puck protectors. He knows how to use his physicality to access the middle and attack the slot. These are all very translatable and valuable skills. And yes, I think that Slavkovsky is going to be a fan favorite in Montreal. He's going to be fun to watch. I think he's going to drive excellent possession metrics, so the analytics community is going to love him, which is hilarious because his like NHLE going into this draft because of his league of production is like, what was it, like a 2% chance of him becoming a star or something by
It was only
Byron
like a
Bader's
19%
model?
chance of him becoming an NHLer or something.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's like, no, like there's more than 19% chance that he plays significant NHL minutes this season. Like, come on.
Well, with
but
any like European prospect that comes in as like a top pick in the draft or like that franchise altering thing, I find they always tend to follow, like, this is a bit of an obscure reference, but they tend to follow like the Pavel Brendel idea, where like at times there are things about their game that come into question that kind of or take away from like the overwhelming just impressiveness of their statistics, especially with the European thing, especially with his performance in the Olympics. So I think like with guys like Patrick Laine, I think Laine was kind of what Brendel should have been had he actually fared well in the NHL. And now that Slafkovsky has been picked as the top selection in the draft, it's nice to see that's not kind of tossed to the wayside for now because fans are just so excited about the prospect of having the first overall pick play next season.
yeah, and thing is, I think that like Slavkovsky, I hope he gets most of the season in the AHL because I think just giving him that opportunity to learn the North American game and just develop without any pressure, without having to be in a locker room that's, I mean, the Habs are going to be terrible next season, and the Laval Rocket are probably going to be excellent. So
The Rocket are no longer a basement dweller.
Exactly.
Like,
and just that is valuable.
If we have Gouli Barron both in the AHL, that's one of the AHL.
Oh, I'd love that.
Parents.
But it's not only Gouli and Barron, it's the fact that like it's the fact that the Rocket have
It's
guys
the entire
who,
depth.
yeah, well, it's the guys who don't. It's not. I wouldn't want to see like a reality check. You have guys like Brandon Gignac and guys like Danik Martel who have seen the other side of the hockey spectrum, where like you have to fight for your paychecks and you go from paycheck to paycheck and you're just trying to find work. So having those guys in the system with a prospect like Slafkovsky will be tremendous for his development. Just to see both sides of the coin.
Yeah, for sure. And like personally, I would love to see a defensive core in Laval that's anchored by Caden Gooley, Justin Barron, Gianni Fairbrother, and Matthias Norlander. Like that would just be very, very fun to me.
And for all we know, the Habs could also send down Weidman if he doesn't make it as a seventh defenseman. And if they send him down,
exactly.
Oh my God, it'd be like having Wayne Gretzky on the blue line, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean Chris Weidman in the AHL would be absurd.
If he doesn't make
61 points.
If he doesn't make the NHL for Yolonen, I think Slavkovsky and Yolonen would be perfect on a line together.
Honestly,
especially if you pair them with a playmaking center,
a
guy who can feed them the puck on both sides, it'd be.
If we can get like a Connor McDavid on the roster, that would be perfect.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah.
Rocket will also have probably the most fitting captain next year in Gabriel Bork as well, who will just be excellent again for development.
Yeah, I'm wondering who like Scott, you're like the AHL expert here. If there's a line with Slavkovsky and Yolonen, which center do you think would best complement them?
I'm just trying to think about the guys that like the Rocket have remaining, because a lot of them kind of border on their potential versus their skill set. Like you have guys like Nate Schnarr who kind of played okay last year for the Rocket, especially in the playoffs, but I don't know what his potential lies if he can actually be a top playmaker. But I think actually, if you're talking about a guy who would be fun to have with them, it'd be Peter Abbandonato, the guy who was a top scorer for the Trophée Lyon last year. And he put up 16 assists in 38 games with the Rocket last season, was a big playoff contributor. So if you're looking for just a small, quick, fast player to kind of feed them the puck, I think he'd be a decent fit.
Yeah.
With Gignac and Abbandonato, the Rocket can find something to work with, because last season, a lot of the guys who works... sorry, Sebastian.
Yeah, sorry, the only options of like actual Habs prospects, I think, down the middle that could technically play on that line would be Cam Hillis, who has struggled in the AHL, and Philip Machar. If you want to go all out fun, you put Philip Machar as the centerman on that line.
But I mean, like the Rocket also have guys that they signed who we have no expectations for. I mean, coming into the next
Yeah,
season,
exactly.
Anthony Beauregard, the U Sports Player of the Year and the ECHL MVP 2 seasons ago, who he might play in 12 or maybe he'll surpass all expectations and he'll
Ooh,
make the Rockets roster.
how about Xavier Simino?
Simeno
That
would
could
be
be
another
fun
amazingly interesting player
because he's a pure playmaker. He's extremely intelligent.
and he has a
Um,
similar
I,
ceiling to Harvey Pinard at the end of the day when you think about his AHL potential.
I would agree. I think again, it's a lot to ask for a player that's played zero professional games to.
Mhm.
I mean, having a line. I mean, again, it wouldn't actually even be the top line necessarily of Slavkovsky, Yolonen, and Simino, because you could have a first line of I don't know, Teasdale, Harvey Pinard, and Bork or something, right? But that could be really fun. I think Simino would be a great complement to those guys because both Simino and Slavkovsky are primarily playmakers. Yolonen is a great goal scorer, and Slavkovsky has a great shot as well. But
Sebastian, one
yeah,
thing that like I just kind of thought of now, you were talking about the defense being Barron, Gooley, whoever else.
their brother,
Jacki is such a
Norlander,
good player. Yeah.
and Jacki. Oh my God,
It's gonna be such
yeah,
I
I
feel like
think,
Jacki and
and
Slavkovsky are gonna have chemistry.
that could be fun. But like, there's so many defensemen that you have to keep track of now because there's Madison Bowie, and then there's all the guys that were there last season, right? Corey Schooneman might
I
start in
forget
the
about Anthony
AHL.
Richard. Anthony Richard and Mitchell Stevens are also coming into the Rocket next year.
Exactly, but they're not defensemen though, are they? They're both forwards.
They're both forwards, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
if we're gonna talk about
But yeah,
defensemen,
but I mean,
maybe
Mitchell Stevens is going to
we
be a good
shooting up
player.
the fact that Lane Hudson is a Hab now.
Um, yeah, my reaction to that was one of pure and utter joy. Like because I live streamed the draft and I clipped my reaction to the Hudson selection, and it's just I'm pretty sure I said the words "Oh my God" at least 50 times. I was very excited. Lane
Yeah, but to
Hudson
make a
is the
point
definition
quickly,
of dynamism.
I forgot that both Stevens and Richard are both centers, and Mitchell Stevens put up 8 points in 4 games in the AHL in a brief call up. So if you're talking about two guys who
Yeah,
might play with them, that's probably your best bet.
yeah, yeah. You're probably right. You see, it's
But
always the new
especially,
guys. It's the new guys that you forget about. Yeah,
the thing that does worry me of Hudson, especially like as much as I was immensely impressed by his showing at the development camp and everything's done, his build is still his build. So at the end of the day, you're gonna have to take that into consideration when it comes to playing a pro game. A guy who's 5'9" and weighs 148 pounds.
yeah, for
How
for
big is
sure.
Matt Dumba?
Again,
Jared Spurgeon. Like they're not Matt Dumba, Jared Spurgeon. There's small defensemen that can make it. And if there's gonna be one, it's gonna be Lane Hudson.
I
Absolutely, but he
you
just
see, like Scott, I've watched a lot of Lane Hudson, like an absurd amount of Lane Hudson because in order for me to rank him 11th overall on my list, I had to be certain of my comfort level with that because of his build.
absolutely.
Like it is just a risk to put him that high on my board because again, I took the scouting thing very, very seriously this year. And the reason I was comfortable doing it is because yes, he's small, but he excels at things that you need to excel at as a small player. He is tremendous at evading pressure. He plays through pressure extremely well, right? Like he embraces it when he gets pressure, right? Some people, some players, smaller players, if they have big players like crowding them or rushing towards them, they panic. Lane Hudson thrives on it, and he exploits that movement. And he's tremendously agile. Like,
The point
yes,
is more
there
so
are
wanted
significant.
to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you can finish. No, the point I more so just wanted to make really quick is just that like it's not the fact that because I've even before the draft again I was a person who was also high on Hudson and I was impressed by what he had shown, but when you think about former top NHL prospects who came into the league and demonstrated similar ways to evade pressure, like I think of another obscure reference, yeah, like Alan McCauley, who was a top prospect for the Leafs in the late 90s. He had the same thing where he was tenacious on the puck. He was a big body checker. Then he got that one big hit and his frame wasn't built for it. And then he started playing scared afterwards. So I think, again, as much as I'm
It's
impressed with the way he
it,
manages to evade
it's
pressure,
also a
it's just
very
taking that
different.
risk.
It's a very different game now than it was in the '90s, right? I think that's also like, look, a player like
Physicality
Lane
is still there at
Hudson.
the end of the day.
it's still there, but it's not nearly as look, the 90s were the years of Scott
The
Stevens,
dead,
right?
it
Where you
was called the
have
dead puck era for a reason.
exactly, right? Whereas in today's game, also because of Lane Hudson's just his mobility and look, he's been rocked with hits before, right? He has been rocked by bigger opponents because every player gets rocked at some point, right? Like no player doesn't get hit, and he just jumps right back up and keeps playing his game, right? He's not rattled by these plays. And look, there's definitely many possible outcomes where he does not turn into an NHL player. But look, he is a guy that I did bet on, right, with where I ranked him, because I'm so confident that he has the ability to surmount the hurdle that is his small frame.
And if
Well, I
I
will one up
could
you with one thing, Sebastian, quickly, is that my dad had no awareness of who Hudson was, and then even he was affirmed of him after watching him at development camp and saying this kid could be
Exactly.
something. So
He not only is he one of the most skilled players in this draft class, I would say he was quite clearly the second most intelligent player in the draft class behind Shane Wright. He reads the play like no other player in the draft class apart from Wright, and that includes guys that I adored in this draft class, like Frank Nazar, who I think is also tremendously intelligent. But Lane Hudson,
Oh no, don't bring him up.
No, but I love Frank Nazar. I don't mind the Kirby Doc trade because I'm so convinced that the Habs would have picked Jonathan Lekkerimäki, who I was low on. So I'm very happy that I'm so certain that they would have gone with Lekkerimäki because my sense is that they had him ranked around 4 or 5 overall. So yeah, but look, that's a good.
You don't want another Hoffman?
you don't want
No, I don't. I really don't. I actively do not want that, which is why I ranked him low. But
people still believe that. People still believe that Doc coming to Montreal is worse than Chicago, and that's like comparing a building that has an unfinished basement to a building that's on fire. It's like you can't even make that comparison anymore. The Hawks have nothing, so the fact about Doc that I think is
it's bad.
Well, the fact about Doc that again is the same thing that applies to Matheson, is that people are expecting him to be an underachieving forward, where this is a 21-year-old guy who was a third overall pick and has a tremendous offensive potential. He's not just going to be a defensive player when he gets here. He's going to be given chances to produce offensively. And for all I know and expect, seen from what I've seen from him before, he will do that.
He's better offensively than defensively, but
absolutely.
But before we get into Doc, the trades, but for the purpose of the Habs perspective, the Montreal Canadiens traded Alexander Romanov, the 66th overall pick, and then 98th overall pick for Kirby Dach. How do you guys feel about that trade on the surface?
If I had put on Cap Friendly that trade that morning, I would have been ridiculed off the website.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Look, I think the Islanders, they got a great player. They made a terrible trade because they could have got so much more for the 13th overall pick.
They could have had Frank Nazar.
They were one asset away from Alex DeBrincat.
That fascination with like how exciting Romanov is kind of encapsulated Canadiens fans to the point where they forget that there are still flaws to his game, and he's still far from being a perfect or even I would say a top 4 player sometimes. So the fact that like when he was traded for Doc, people were comparing how bad Doc was compared to Romanov. I don't know how I feel about that, and I feel like that Doc ceiling compared to Romanov's is night and day.
If I can add,
and it's also about like.
So,
go ahead.
Being at the Bell Center, Gary Bettman comes up, everybody boos him, and he says, "There's 2 trades found. Montreal Canadiens fans, Montreal, you're gonna be happy." And he decided to make this announcement right when Seattle got on the clock to pick number 4.
Yeah, you see, that's what killed me. I was convinced that the Habs were about to get Shane Wright, right? That's what killed me.
Thought the Habs were about to get Shane Wright, and the first trade goes Alexander Romanov, 98, go to New York for 13.
Exactly, and now you flip that for 4.
And the moment he said Blackhawks, the room dropped. And then when he said Kirby, we got right back excited. But it was just such a wild roller coaster there.
But at the end of the day, the Habs are just benefiting from the.
Go ahead.
Sorry about that. At the end of the day, the Habs was benefiting from the fact that the Hawks desperately want to move on from everything the Wirtz family and Stan Bowman ever did. And because of that, every team's just going to take the profits from that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
pretty much.
definitely
And
that Gendok is a really good pickup. He's kind of the player that Montreal's been looking for the past. I don't
And the
know.
one
There's
Bergevin
a
said they can never
big
acquire.
guy. Yeah, exactly. He's
A center?
got size. He's a center. He can play with the puck in the offense zone, and he's not terrible defensively. Like this is what Michael McCarron should have been when
Oof.
we did him. Whoever knows how long ago that was.
National Predators legend.
Yeah, he missed a lot of time last year and the year before, I believe, with injuries. So like
wrist injuries. Yeah.
Wrist. This is like could be seen as his just sophomore with 2 more years of growth that he's definitely just way too young to write him off as anything. I think he could be a really good, solid second line center, and it explains why Montreal didn't pick up Wright, unfortunately, first.
Yeah, exactly. And
If I can add actually one more
yeah,
thing.
Aaron, go ahead.
The pick that was used, select Romanov, we traded Dutch Gretzky,
yes,
and Thomas Fleischmann for 4 years of Phil Deneau and Kirby Dach, basically.
It's still part of the best trade that Marc Bergevin ever did.
Yeah, that's
yeah, for sure.
But again, once again, profiting from the fact that the Hawks were so desperate to keep their dynasty intact. Now look where they are. The dynasty's in ruins, and there's barely any memory of what they once were.
Oh, poor Luke Richardson.
Yeah, literally. I mean, to put into consideration, the Blackhawks technically have 3 players on their roster. If you think about it, they have Seth Jones, they have Jonathan Toews, and they have Patrick Kane. That's it. If you technically think about it like that.
Lucas Reichel.
Oh yes, of course.
And they brought in Athanasiou, which I was a little sad about because I really like him. And they brought in Max
Domi as well. Yeah,
Max Domi. Yeah. No, but like Kirby Dach, I think, is a very interesting acquisition for the Habs because the way I see it, he is a better version of Jesperi Kotkaniemi and better not because he plays the same game, but because he has that like mold of big centerman, right? That was drafted 3rd overall very recently, and I just think that Dach's game is a lot more projectable in terms of being a difference maker in the NHL than Kotkaniemi's. He has more outstanding skills than Kotkaniemi does. That at least in my opinion, but
his entire contract incentives also weren't based on screwing around the Canadians like what the Hurricanes did.
Yeah. I mean that's I don't know that I don't really mind that too much, but Kirby Dach, I wrote a massive Twitter thread on Kirby Dach, which has gotten quite a bit of attention. He's a very fun player because I think that his ceiling is quite high if he can fix a couple issues in his game, and they really boil down to his skating. He's very, very mobile, but he lacks knee bend, and if he can like improve his knee bend, so basically just have a lower stance in his overall game when he's skating, when he's engaging physically, I think it will overhaul his game. It will add power to his stride. It will make him more adaptable as a skater. When engaging physically, he's going to have a lower center of gravity and win more board battles, because one of the big like concerns with Dach is that he's a big player who doesn't play very physically, which again is a concern. However, because I think that there are these little tweaks that will change things, because he can play a very strong game, he just doesn't have the technique down of how to do so effectively. And because it's these like little things that I think are very, very fixable, it makes me have a lot of hope in Dach having a high ceiling, because the Habs have a good development system finally.
Especially coming into
yeah, go ahead.
Especially coming just to maybe for Nicholas, especially just going to the thing is last season and the past few seasons, the Blackhawks have been stuck in a limbo where they've been trying to A, either rebuild or B, try and compete, and they can't really decide what they want to do. So for a prospect like him to finally go to a team that is fully bent on just rebuilding and developing prospects, I think it'll give him a chance to finally flourish.
But Sebastian, under the aspects that you presented, his game actually reminds me a lot of a big center, third overall pick, Pierre-Luc Dubois.
He
Yep,
plays a
and
very
potential future
game.
Canadian.
Dubois, he is just like extremely. He's a very powerful player, which Doc isn't. Doc is more of a finesse type of guy. Dubois is just an absolute beast, and he loves to play around the net. He's a goal scorer primarily, whereas Doc is a playmaker like through and through. But honestly, I think that Doc's playmaking off the rush, like what I would love to see this season is Cole Caulfield on a line with Kirby Doc, because Caulfield and Suzuki together they've had their moments, but their actual results have been iffy, even though it's been fun at times. I'd love to see a little shakeup and just see Doc with Caulfield, because I think that could be dynamic, with Doc's playmaking off the rush and Caulfield's goal scoring off the rush. That'd be very, very fun for me to see.
Yeah,
but
I've been saying that for a while, that I don't think Suzuki and Caulfield are going to end up on the same line long term. But Doc is just the perfect kind of player for a guy like Caulfield, because he can make a perfect one-time pass. And if you watch his game,
it's
never really
it's
got the chance
amazing.
to do it. Like he wasn't able to use it in because he was playing.
One of the clips I had in my Twitter thread was Kirby Doc off the rush, and through 2 layers of defense, he put a pass on the tape of Lucas Reichel, and that was a thing of beauty. He was in motion. Reichel was sprinting up the middle. Again, it was through 2 layers of defense, and it was the perfect pass. And that gets me very excited when you see those flashes of genuine playmaking brilliance. I really think that Doc has a high-end second-line center upside.
Yeah, and then you throw on a physical presence like Slavkovsky, who can keep the puck and protect them, basically. And I think that is an explosive line.
Yeah.
Can I say that I totally hate everything about this Dubois stuff? It infuriates me. He's got no room on the team unless you get rid of Doc, and I'd rather have Doc than him. And he's like acting like he could hold out on a team when I don't think that he's good enough to do that. I can't stand it. It's just like him strong into Montreal, and I'm just like, I do not want you here at all. Just put your head down and play. You've abandoned 2 other teams already. What makes you think that you're going to come to a terrible rebuilding Montreal team and be happy about losing all the time? It's just makes sense to me. It's so.
You see, I kind of love it. Like I've been enjoying this entire saga. It's been very entertaining, and I also think that, look, the NHL is kind of going towards the direction of, well, at least in my view, that like you don't necessarily have numbered lines of 1, 2, 3, 4. You might have a dedicated 4th line. Most teams do, but if you have the top 3 lines centered by Suzuki, Doc, and Dubois, I mean, it gives you so much flexibility in the middle. Also, Dubois can play on the wing. It gives you so many options, and I'd be very curious, just because of how much leverage the Canadians have in these negotiations, just how cheaply they could acquire Dubois in terms of the actual like trade cost. The contract is probably going to be around the Suzuki number, but I'd be very curious to see it happen. And the more time I spend thinking about it, the more I kind of like the prospect of having Dubois in a Habs jersey.
Me too. I think you can relate it a lot to Adam Fox to New York. which I think a lot of people forget that it's actually his third team because he was traded by Calgary to
Yeah.
Carolina. Never
Yep.
played a game in either jersey, but he was able to dictate that he wanted to go to New York, and he went to New York. And we're not going to get the Adam Fox or the Artemi Panarin who would only sign realistically long term in Montreal, except for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And I feel like we kind of have to take the opportunity if it's given to us.
Yeah, and I also think that like even when you look back at when Dubois like quote unquote forced his way out of Columbus, the rumors then were also saying that it was because he wanted to be a Hab, right? It's not like he was trying to force his way to one team and now he switched to a different team. Like his goal has always been to be a Hab, and at least for me, it's exciting for once to see any prominent NHL player wanting that desperately to be a Montreal Canadian. But
Last time we had
honestly,
that, it was Corey Perry, and we just decided to let him go.
oh, good Lord, yeah. But I think it's most likely that Dubois ends up being a Hab in 2 years' time as a free agent. But um, I'm still gonna enjoy the chaos of the rumor mill as long as he doesn't sign a contract in Winnipeg because it's fun. It's chaotic and it's really funny to watch because all the trade proposals are absurd and I love them.
Look, and it's easy to say he has character issues, but the two organizations he's been part of was the late 2010s Columbus Blue Jackets and the Winnipeg Jets. Like he gets a bit of a pass.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, also joining the Habs. The thing is, what's so interesting with the Habs this season is I personally can't think of any other team that's going into a season where they're so clearly going to be awful. Like they're going to be rebuilding, right? It's so
Chicago.
clear. No. But this is what I was saying. But I haven't seen a team be on such a clear rebuilding path while just the overall like vibe of the team just being so incredibly positive, ranging from the young guns on the team to the veterans, right? Everyone is just seems excited to be back, right? Like Chris Weidman, he could have gotten more money if he signed elsewhere. Rem Pitlick could have gotten more money if he signed elsewhere. But these players are choosing to stay. Again, they're depth players. Not it's not the same thing as if it's a big name, but there's a real air like, ever since Marty St. Louis took over of excitement despite the losing record. And
Exactly.
that's something that has me very happy for the Montreal Canadiens, even going into this rebuilding season.
Like if there's one thing that keeps the fans optimistic, because I don't think that under Dominique Ducharme going into a rebuild, we would have been nearly as excited, was at the draft, Marty St. Louis got about a 15-minute ovation. He couldn't even talk because we were clapping and cheering too hard. He is beloved. He's beloved. And I think he's the piece that's going to make this rebuild palatable for fans.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree. But yeah, I mean, I made mention of the Rem Pitlick extension now, and at least for me, it was surprisingly affordable. Like 2 years at 1.1 is an excellent contract, if you ask me, especially for a player that put up over half a point a game for an entire season and was the third top scorer in the Habs lineup. Um, but yeah, what are your guys' thoughts on the Pitlick extension, starting with Josh, considering that you haven't exactly had the opportunity to talk too much so far. So you have the floor to talk about Rem Pitlick for the next half hour.
Oh, putting the pressure on. Half an hour. Okay. Well, I mean, he's got three brothers in the team that could help. Got Tyler and blanking on the other brother's name that Montreal drafted the other year.
Right.
Rhett, Ram, and Tyler. And I mean, obviously, right now he's definitely the best and most interesting player of the three, and it's a uh, fantastic contract, a fantastic just play by the Canadians by avoiding the whole arbitration thing, which gotten them even more money and more term. And it's just low risk, high reward. Like he's got the possibility to keep like a 30-40 point pace in upwards. And for 1.1 million, that's a very good value deal on a rebuilding team. That's just perfect. And
I'm trying to think of similar players impact-wise that just got a contract. And the first one that comes to mind for me is Luke Kunin in San Jose. Just got 2.75 times 2. And I don't think there's that big
That's
of
a rough contract.
Rem Pitlick and Luke Kunin. 1.1 is way lower than I thought it was going to be. If it was 2 years, I thought that number was 2. Maybe 1.75, 1.8. I thought it was going to be a carbon copy of Jake Evans' deal. But 1.1 is just an absolute slam dunk. Clearly, he wants to be here.
Exactly. Like he could have gotten more money elsewhere. And especially if you look, because again, this was announced like what, half an hour after the Jeff Petry trade. Like Petry for Matheson freed up what, 1.3 something?
The transaction and all, I think freed up 1.6.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was just immediately reusing the freed up cap space from trading away Jeff Petry to re-sign Rem Pitlick. So if you look at the trade, not only as Petry and Paling for Madison in the fourth, but if you add in Rem Pitlick into the return, the trade starts looking even better. So yeah, kind of like loop it all back around to the beginning. But also, Josh, didn't you have a history segment that you wanted to present today?
Oh, who told? Who spilled the beans? I do.
You do indeed. This is exciting. This day in Habs history for the first time in quite a while.
On this day, the year of our Lord, 1892, little baby James Dickinson Dick Irving Jr. was born in Hamilton, Ontario. The Irvins, at age 8, Dick Irvin and the Irvins moved to Winnipeg, where his father drove the junior hockey team to some games by horse and buggy through snowstorms. His first professional contract was with the Portland Rosebuds of the Pacific Coast Hockey Association for $750 in 1916. At 34, Dick Irvin played his first NHL games as the first captain of the Chicago Blackhawks. However, in his second season, a fractured skull ended his playing career. Just 2 years later, Irvin was named coach of the Chicago Blackhawks, when in his first year as coach, he looks to the final, only to lose the series and his job. But a month into the new season, the Toronto Maple Leafs hired him after losing their first 5 games, and the Leafs would go on to win the Cup that year. Irvin would take the Leafs to the final 6 more times, but lost each and every time. At the 6th loss, Conn Smythe, then manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, pushed Irvin away from the Leafs and towards the Montreal Canadiens, where he became the longest tenured Montreal Canadiens coach of all time. Irvin took a 10-win team, brought them into the playoffs the very next year, and then won 3 Stanley Cup with the team in 1944, 1946, and 1952. Irvin retired as a coach in 1956, having coached 1,449 games, winning 692 of them. He won 4 Stanley Cups. His 806 games coached and 431 wins mark him second all-time in Montreal Canadiens coach history, behind just Toe Blake in both categories.
Well, thank you for that, Josh. These history segments are always perfection. And I have zero bias because I'm definitely not just a history student that loves history. So yeah, that has nothing to do with it whatsoever. But thanks for that, Josh. And I think on that note, we're going to wrap up the episode because there was a lot to cover. And I feel like with the history segment, it's all kind of tied up into a nice little bow. And we still have we're leaving a ton of topics for the upcoming episodes, because there's no guarantee that we're going to have more breaking news or big moves to cover in the upcoming weeks and months, and leaving some of the prospect analysis of the Habs' other draft picks apart from Slavkovsky and Hudson, I think is a good investment for the future, and leaving some options open. But no, this was a great episode, guys. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you again to Scott, who checked out a little bit earlier, but Josh and Aaron. Well, on that note, we're gonna wrap this up. And if you've listened this far, thank you so much for tuning in for the entire episode. And hopefully we'll have another one up for you very, very soon. So thank you, guys.